Well, welcome everybody. My name is Mike Monroe. I'm the owner of Kohei Hills Consulting. We are here today to talk about BPR, and we call that a roadmap to change. I'm going to start with my first slide, which is going to be just to tell you a quick little story about a client. Everybody has a process that's stuck in some era, some bygone era. I had a client that had purchased almost spent about $1 million on a various timekeeping system. In that timekeeping system, they had invested in hardware and software and process improvement, or so they thought. I went out to one of the parts of the organization, and they said, "Yeah, we really just love this new time card system. Look at how it works." And they scanned in their card, and they scanned their badge, and they showed me the time entry, and then they showed me how they clocked out, and they showed me some cool reports that they got. And I said, "Great, how does it process?" And they said, "Well, we just hit the button over here on the screen, and it prints out a printout." I said, "Well, where does that go?" He says, "I don't know, I guess downtown." So I took that document, and I followed it, and I went downtown, and I found a group of people that met every payroll around a table that took all these cards, all these pieces of paper, and filled out bubble cards. And then they took those bubble cards over to their old Scantron and scanned that into the system and created their time card entry. Well, obviously, they'd missed the mark on the project by taking what they'd always done and not utilizing the new software fully to integrate an interface. And that's really an outcome of not really doing a proper analysis at the beginning of the project and having a plan in place. So our agenda today will be kind of a brief introduction to Kohei Hills and who are we to be telling you anything anyway. Talking about business process reengineering, what we've learned about it over the years, our methodology, why would you spend time, effort, and money on BPR? I think there are a lot of organizations that have done some form of BPR in the past, and we'll talk about different types of BPR later. And they may not see that as being value, but we believe in quantifiable improvement. It's something we wrapped our idea of BPR around. If you're going to spend time and money and effort, you have to justify and track your investment. Of course, we'll talk about how you can help, but this is information you can use on your own, and certainly take a process internally and try to make effective change. We're all about helping clients try to make effective change. So who's Kohei Hills Consulting? We're an independent consulting firm. We have a combined experience of hundreds of years of experience on government, K-12, nonprofit research organizations. If you think fund accounting, we've been there. We have former CFOs, CIOs, CEOs, HR directors on staff. We project management on numerous public sector implementation, and we're experienced system integrators. The slide of our team just shows that we have a team of experts. I won't go into the details except to say there's more than a few gray hairs there. We have a lot of experience. The average person on our staff is 15 to 20 years experience, and of course we've got some younger folks that also bring in some new vision as well. So we've got a really good blended team and a lot of experience. So as they say, enough about us. Let's talk a little bit about process improvement. The slide that you're seeing now represents something that I find kind of funny, and that basically oftentimes people will buy something new and shiny and then just hook up their old process to it. They just drop it in. And of course, I'm sure anybody on this call has been part of a project that had a certain goal in mind, and at the end of that, they had not met the goals of that project. BPR can help ensure that a project is outcome-based, or we know at the beginning what the results are going to be at the end. So we find certain things to be true. How organizations change is that the change has to start at the top. I have a friend who's a project manager, and he told me a story of being on a project where he was working with a clerk level person who was a key person in the project. And as project manager, we become known as dogs without teeth. We can tell a client what to do or how to make the change, but if we don't have an executive sponsor or start somebody at the top of the organization, it's very hard to make the change. He was dealing with this fairly resistant person, a completely resistant person, and telling her that she needed to do A, B, and C, and she was not doing that. One day he finally had enough and went to the boss, the head of the organization, and said, this person isn't getting in the way of the project. The person walked over to her desk and said, you have one of two choices. You can help this project manager out with the project, or you can give me your letter of resignation today. Obviously, that project turned corner at that point in time. Without that kind of executive sponsorship, it's very hard to make changes. We realize that. We recognize that. We can help your organization by talking to your leaders and helping them understand the importance of their involvement. Ultimately, everybody must be involved at some level. Effective change requires a goal and knowledge of the current process. That's what we need to get at. We also believe that change is continuous and it can't be retained without effort and periodic reinforcement. Improvement is continuous. I equate it to, if people say that people don't like change, I don't find that to be the case. I find that people like change as long as it is they understand it, it's non-threatening. They don't like change that's rogue change, change that comes in waves. But people tend to, if organizationally you get to the point where it's part of your culture, change is like erosion. It happens over time. And it becomes an effective organizational methodology. And that's what we see effective organizations moving through BPR towards continuous improvement change. So what is BPR? Well, organizations change or improve through BPR because they understand how and why. The why is the most important question. Things are done. They implement changes that will help the organizations do things better, faster, and are cheaper in the future. Change for the sake of change is craziness. Change with an outcome in mind is good planning and good stewardship. We find that technology projects are great opportunities for organizations to improve the processes and leverage new functionality that they might have, but these can be done discrete of a technology project. They can be done independently of a big project. They can be done in small pieces and large pieces. We really see clients can cement old, outdated processes into the new system, the horse pulling the Humvee. We always try to avoid that whenever possible. So in business process reengineering, the how and the what an organization is doing is not as important as the why. Of course, we need to find out how you do it and what you do now. But people often get caught on that or stuck in that moment. What we need to find out is why, and why again. Because oftentimes organizations have no idea why they do a process or why they do it like they do it. It has evolved over time through a series of perhaps unfortunate events, but oftentimes it's evolved over a 20, 30, 40-year period. So what we need to do is make our BPR outcome should be quantified. So we need to say, when we get through our business process reengineering, what is our return on investment? I had a client one time say to me, we continue because we do it efficiently. I hear this a lot, in fact. Why do you do that? Well, because we do it really well. We pay people. Okay, so that means it's efficient? Yeah, of course, because we pay people. And I'd say, well, you know, if I'm living in San Francisco and I'm driving to Los Angeles, there's 100 ways to get there. Does it take a day, or does it take 3 days, or does it cost me 2 tanks of gas? are we doing it efficiently, is really the answer. Just because you have the right outcome doesn't necessarily mean you're doing it efficiently. So I'm sure many of you have been involved at some point in a business process reengineering of some variety. And there may be a few of you, this is a new concept, but it's not an entirely new concept. I think that software vendors have been pitching BPR for quite some time. What we find is that there's different types of business process reengineering. The first type is what I would call a software optimization. What we're going to really do is we're going to dig in and see that your software is configured correctly. And they kind of wrap BPR around that as if it's actually improving your business in some way. Well, really what it's doing is making sure you're using the software well. And I think that needs to be part of any process improvement, but it is usually a fairly small part. There's the other piece that I'm sure that many of my clients have been involved in. When I first talked to them about BPR, they said, oh, we did a BPR 3 years ago, and that was a waste of money. And you ask them, well, why do you feel like it was a waste of money? Well, we just wrote the document and we never did anything with it. I call that the curse your darkness approach. Basically, you analyze the entire process, you tell a client everything that they should be doing, and you have absolutely no plan or scope of work to move those changes forward. We kind of adhere to the light a candle approach, which is if you're ready to make the change and want to have the will to make that change, we can give you a plan that takes you all the way through. You can do the plan yourself. You map your current processes, your as-is state. How is it today? Nobody likes to do that, but you have to. You do your 2B mapping, which is how it's going to be in the future. You take those 2B maps and you move those 2B maps to recommended changes, meaning you take the outcomes from those 2B, the differences between the as-is and the 2B, and put them into recommended changes. We take those recommended changes and we move them into a scope of work and project plan. We quantify the outcome of certain things along the way, and we'll talk about how we do that later. We make the change and we track the results. We call that quantifiable improvement. BPR without quantifiable improvement has no barometer. You can't tell. It has no compass. You can't tell if it's going the right direction or not. So let's dig in a little bit to as-is mapping. So everybody on the call is probably familiar with something called the Hawthorne effect, or the observer effect. It goes something like, I know someone's looking at this, therefore I'll modify my behavior. Just by looking at the process, we begin to change the process. People have done something a certain way for a long time and they know it's high time they change something. They'll just naturally change it just because they know somebody's coming to interview them. And that's fine. That's a good thing. Beyond that, though, people don't tend to like to do as-is mapping. They'll tell me oftentimes, oh, Mike, we don't need to do as-is mapping. Just let's move on to the 2B, because that's what we want to talk about. We know we're broken. Well, the problem is if we don't understand the basis of how you do it now, we can never get to the point of ensuring that we don't drop something in the 2B process. I would say as-is mapping is more critical to the process, or as critical to the process as 2B mapping. We can take those processes and we use Visio. You can use you can use a whiteboard. You can map these any way you want. It doesn't really matter. We use various icons to represent different functions, features, systems, interfaces, etc. Flowcharts or swimming lanes. It kind of depends on the process, but you can do either. We ask you once, and then we ask you again, and then we ask you another time. And the reason is we've come to the determination over the years is that people don't often know their own process. They know their piece of the process, but they don't know organizationally how something processes. They think they know, but then when they start digging, they realize certain things that they either didn't know or have to ask somebody about. And we call this the progression confession. The more we ask, the more we get. Once we gather that data, we can determine the cost to the organization on certain things. I'm going to use an example of a check request, paper check request that we BPR'd at a client, and the ROI on that. You could have a personnel action. You could have an onboarding of an employee. You could have a process for booking a conference room. Any of those things can be mapped, and we can show or quantify an improvement. As-is mapping is hugely important to the process. So next in the process, we would do 2B mapping. This is where we review your as-is flowchart with you. We look for cumbersome processes, overly complex, manual, offline, spreadsheets, multiple resources on it, multiple touch points for the data. You probably know these areas already. You probably know some of the answers of the areas that are ripe to be mapped and moved and transitioned. Then we work with our content expertise. You saw our slide on all of our content experts. We've actually BPR'd things outside of ERP systems. We've BPR'd food stamp eligibility systems. We've BPR'd nutrition services systems. We've BPR'd tourism companies. It really doesn't matter. We can find a content expert that understands the business rules of that industry. For instance, on our nutrition services project, we brought in a nutrition services director that we'd worked with in the past and asked him to help out for 5 hours on our content expertise. You can always find the person that knows that better than anybody else, be that HR, payroll, human finance, purchasing, stores inventory, asset management, whatever that might be. They need to understand your process, obviously, to develop the maps with you, the key stakeholders. Then these maps graphically represent the recommendations and requirements. Of course, we need to do something with that now. We can use that as a basis for an RFP if you're going out to find new software or new services, or we can use it as a scope of work if you're upgrading your current system. So I'm giving you an example of a map we did one time. I think this was way back. Grant and I did this mapping. I was at the client, and they didn't have a whiteboard, so I put this pad on the floor and started writing out their process, really just using a pen and asking them, interviewing them, and I think this is probably my second take on this. And then I took that information and put it into an as-is map in Visio. And represented here is a highly, very, very paper-driven process. As you can see, there's different types of forms that go through, and they're all paper, and they go through signatures, and then ultimately they end up in the software on step 26 or something like that. And of course, what we wanted to do was get them into the system, ideally early on in the process. And it doesn't matter which ERP system you use. This is really has no bearing on the matter. You need to get it into your system sooner and without less paper. So the process in the next map, in the 2B, was then we actually implemented a web form for this client, and it works via workflow, and it does the insert automatically, and they can track it from the very beginning. So we used a web form to create the contract request. They used the contract management module in their ERP system. They used attachments. They did workflow, and they removed an award letter that they were sending out. They just sent an email instead. There's still a few things that are offline because they had a bid process they didn't want to re-engineer. But once they get the savings from this process, I think that would be the next step they might do. This client then, we took this particular map, and we had, at some clients we'll do dozens or in one case hundreds of maps of different processes that move into a recommendations document. Now, from here, what I don't have on my screen is the next step I would do is actually create all of my recommendations and requirements would become part of a recommendations and requirements spreadsheet that I could use as the basis of my project plan or scope of work. Then I could quantify the improvement in key areas. We could study this, for instance, this contract. We could study and say, how much did it cost per transaction for organization to process this before? Grab those variables, understand that cost, quantify, tracking would be utilized, and the results could be visual. So I'm going to give an example of taking BPR kind of the next step to quantifiable improvement. In this particular example, I'm talking about a paper check request process. In this case, we took the process from a 6-day average process time and reduced it to 2. We didn't take that into consideration as value added, except to say we did increase the time. We didn't put any dollars behind that. But actually there are dollars that are equated to it, in as much as this client can utilize vendor terms now and perhaps get 2 net 10, where they get a 2% discount on all their invoices for paying within 10 days because their process only takes 2 days for the check request to come in. Those are opportunities that we didn't even quantify in this particular example. 30 minutes of the organizational work were reduced to 15. Multiple touch points were reduced, and instead of a person filling out a piece of paper and submitting that through interoffice mail and then having somebody type that into a screen, we have the person enter the check request online, and then it flows to that person to be a data reviewer, not a data enterer. We eliminated paper. We eliminated errors. We eliminated filing and retrieval issues. And we took the transactions from $15 approximately per transaction and reduced it to $7.50. When we do these types of when we quantify like this, we tend to be really conservative on these numbers. We tend to really be saving more than that, because we never want to be accused of overstating it, because we find that just even showing half of it is going to get us there. So in this case, we took the external cost of the implement. So I think it cost this client about $30,000 in development of some variety, and internally it cost them about $5,000 in resources working on it. So we said, okay, there's a $35,000 ROI line. We got to find $35,000 in transactions. So that meant we had to have 4,600 transactions out of $7.50 savings to reach that ROI point. Well, we could show that graphically. And what we did was we showed in the next slide that we just kind of draw our line and said that by Q3 of that year, we were showing that we had more than broke even on that project. Okay, great. So that's fine. We broke even. What's next? Well, how much was our ROI? So to date, how much have we, every transaction that goes through is going to add another $7.50 to this. So we want to see that on the fly. We want to be able to show somebody when they come and say, why did we spend that $35,000 again? Or we just did this last year, didn't we? Instead of having to defend why you're spending the money on improving your processes, you're showing them, your stakeholders, a return on investment. You have to know your variables. You have to know how much it costs to change. And you have to realize how much it costs not to change. That's one of the things by examining this that you'll find is that you start to realize you probably have a gut feeling. But if you quantify this, it is incumbent upon you to try to make some action to get save that money for the organization. You can break it down into multiple projects as well. So if you're doing a paperless check and you have a barcoding project, maybe you have an online journal entry, a personnel action form, you can quantify all those various projects and show the break-even point, if you've reached it yet, the investment and the return to date. The great thing about this is that oftentimes we'll see in organizations that their board or their guiding group will have let's use an IT CIO. A CIO of an organization will go to their funder or their board and say, I need X amount of dollars for an upgrade. And they'll say, well, we just spent X amount of dollars last year. And there's, you can't blame them. They're looking for something that shows a return on investment. I would ask, our question and answer period, maybe you can give me some examples of times you've talked to your governing bodies about return on investment. It's something that doesn't come up much at our clients, but we find that by quantifying it, showing them the improvement of the business process reengineering, that they tend to want to do it over and over again. We have several clients that kind of have seen the value of it that continue to say, okay, well, we want to do this project. Now we want to do this next project. So what's the outcome? At the end of a QI project, you're going to have a complete set of as-is maps. You need to have a complete set of 2B process maps, your recommendations and requirements, your scope of work. Now, at scope of work time, you could also do a RFP if you chose to go out and choose new software or services, a project plan, and what improvements you're going to quantify and how you're going to track them. Now, I will say on the recommendations and requirements, it's key that you prioritize them, because really, at the end of the day, you have to decide which order you're going to do them. You can't do everything all at once. Oftentimes, we find that if we prioritize those in the proper way, that we can have that kind of continuous improvement plan that organizations are looking for these days as budgets are shrinking, as staffing is shrinking. So there's lots of ways to spend your process improvement dollars. There's lots of ways to do it. And organizations are always trying to figure out a way, hey, how can we spend $1 and save 5? This process helps to make sure that they're spent in the best possible way, and it'll track those items that oftentimes people think that they need to change a process, but if you can't justify it, it takes a back seat to those things that you can justify immediately. It helps to organize the process of change. Just some examples of measurable values and goals. Obviously, reducing process cost, reducing process time, reducing new hire cost. I have to hire new people because my process became so complex. Reducing number of errors, reducing time to correct errors. And you can tie the savings to the spending on any new projects you do. So in other words, we spent, $20,000 on this project. We have a net savings to date of $40,000. Any organization would see that as valuable. If we only showed a $10,000 return on investment, we might scratch our heads and say, what did we get wrong when we were quantifying this? That is not something that we run across because of the fact that we do a really good job at the beginning of deciding if there's value enough in the endeavor to make the change. So this came from a client. They were in the process of choosing an ERP system, and they were looking at multiple systems, and it turned out that they had a Tier 1 appetite and a Tier 2 budget. And one of the people says, well, how much success can we really afford? And I thought it was pretty funny. The clients often say, well, we can't afford to make that change. And I often say, well, wait a second, if you're spending $15 per transaction right now, ignorance is bliss. I understand that. Not knowing that you're spending $15 per transaction right now is fine. But the minute that you know it, you kind of have to change it if you know you can and save money to be good stewards. At least that's how we feel. We feel that our niche is helping clients showing customers some sort of ROI, and you can do it as well internally. So anybody that's ever seen a presentation by me understands I have to tell the ham story. So a guy goes home and his wife has prepared a beautiful ham, and she's cut the ends off the ham. And he says, honey, how come you do that? He says, well, my mother did it, and it makes it taste better. Okay. He calls the mother and says, hey, Mom, how come you cut off the ends of the ham? He says, well, my mom did it, and it really makes it taste better. And they call Grandma, and they say, hey, Grandma, how come you cut off the ends of the ham? And she said, well, we had that little oven. Now, everybody understands they have a little oven. They develop their processes at some point in time, and those processes haven't necessarily changed to match the new technology, to match the new office. We find that people are stuck in the 70s oftentimes, that they have not evolved their business process. I remember, I'm old enough to remember the 70s pretty well, and I remember the promise of technology was that we would have a paperless office. And if anything, well, it absolutely was the complete opposite. We have more paper than ever, we have more information than ever, and we have more steps than ever to complete the task. We've now, in many times, just bolted technology on as another step to jump through in a manual process. We believe BPR is the key to utilizing the technologies, best practices, industry standards, while examining the quantifiable improvement to show return on investment for that. So 2 seconds on Hills. Basically, we do tons of business process improvement. We have experts on our team. We help you with a data-driven improvement project. Certified project managers, few of them just certifiable. Training and consulting on your ERP system. We do RFP development. We do web form development, portal development. We do integration, interfaces, report development. Currently working on getting some Cognos expertise on staff as well. We're Google Apps partners, just to the side, and we do IT services and strategic planning with our team.